be in a good mood. It was a difficult week, very depressing week. I'm sure you saw Hamas, the terrorist group that runs Gaza, broke into Israel, killed over 1,300 people, men, women, and children. And then the college kids in America went full Trump and said there's very fine people on both sides. What is going on? 34 Harvard student associations signed a letter that basically threw their lot in with the killers. But there was a backlash because some CEOs said when these kids now go for a job, they're going to be blacklisted. And a lot of the students are still standing by their position to support the war criminals, but they strenuously object to the word blacklist.
Good morning. It's Friday, Police Craft Friday, December the 8th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Military Shorts, Soviet Sub, Bishop Maher, 33 Strategies of War, and Police Craft. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, the military shorts.
Why did U.S. helicopters in Vietnam fly with the doors open? Think about any photo or movie of the Vietnam War. You've probably seen soldiers sitting close to the edge of the cabin or with their legs dangling out as the helicopter zips along at over 100 miles per hour. But why fly with the doors wide open? There were several reasons. For starters, Huey helicopters weren't designed with mounted machine guns in mind, so the doors had to be open or removed to operate them. Second, it made loading and unloading much faster, which is important when you're being exposed to enemy gunfire. And third, it helped to air out a potentially hot and filthy cabin. Now you might be wondering how soldiers didn't simply fall out of the moving helicopter. The answer mostly boils down to physics. As a helicopter accelerates, centrifugal and centripetal forces act on the cabin, helping to keep everyone inside. But in case the laws of physics weren't enough or it was an especially bumpy ride, soldiers could always strap in.
Here are the weirdest Russian military items found by the Ukrainian army. When Ukrainians destroyed a Russian tank in March 2022, they realized it wasn't a standard model. In fact, it was the only one of its type, a prototype, which indicates how quickly the Russians were running out of supplies. A strange steel box that looked like a shipping container was found to contain sensitive Russian communication devices, a spy device that wasn't exactly inconspicuous. Despite its low-tech appearance, it was designed to interfere with radio waves. A lot of empty missile containers were found, later identified as decoy missiles that would send Ukrainian cities into a panic without actually wasting the quickly dwindling Russian arsenal. The most disturbing find was definitely the PFM-1, a tiny mine only 4.5 inches long and colorful like a toy but packed with an explosive liquid. These tiny mines were designed to maim and were used heavily in Afghanistan. But the most shocking thing found in Russian equipment left behind in Ukraine was definitely American military technology. Before it launched the war, Russia had a closer military tie with the West, and now it's using many of those same weapons against it.
Naval warfare has evolved significantly over the years, and modern warships are designed to be versatile and adaptable to different operational missions. While cannons still play a role in naval warfare, they are not the sole focus of a warship's armament. Maintaining multiple guns is expensive, both in terms of personnel and resources. Modern naval guns are also very complex and require a lot of specialized training to operate. Modern warships are designed to be as stealthy as possible, and multiple guns would add to the ship's radar signature, making it easier to detect. Modern warships have only one cannon because missiles have replaced large naval guns as the primary weapon for ship-to-ship combat. Missiles are more accurate, have a longer range, and can carry a larger payload than naval guns. They are also more difficult to defend against. The trend is clear. Modern warships are increasingly relying on missiles for their primary firepower, and the number of guns on these ships is shrinking. There are a few factors that contribute to the cost difference between Russian and American fighter jets. One main factor is that the cost of labor and materials in Russia is generally lower than in the United States. American defense contractors often invest heavily in advanced technologies, research facilities, and extensive testing programs, which can drive up the overall cost of the aircraft. Russian defense industry, on the other hand, may have different R&D priorities and cost structures. The manufacturing processes used by Russian and American defense industries can differ, leading to variations in costs. The cost of labor, raw materials, and production infrastructure can vary between countries, affecting the overall cost of producing fighter jets. Additionally, the design philosophy and technical requirements for the two nations' fighter jets may differ, which can affect the cost of development and production. It's worth noting that the cost of a fighter jet can vary widely depending on the specific model, features, and quantities being produced. There are two types of missile launches: the cold launch and the hot launch. For example, the Russian R-36 ICBM, NATO code name SS-18 Satan, uses the cold launch method. Because of this launch method, the missile has a reload capability most other ICBMs don't have. The missile is normally stored in a container within the silo. Upon launch, the missile is ejected out of the silo by a piston that is pushed by a black powder charge. The missile's engines ignite above the ground after leaving the silo. What this means is that the silo itself is not damaged by the launching of the missile like a hot launch would. It is possible that the spent container be removed and a new loaded container inserted into the silo in a very short period of time. On the other side, the Minuteman III was a hot launch missile, meaning its engines ignited inside the silo. The silo would have to be repaired before any new missile could be loaded. This would be considerably longer than a cold launch silo would take.
The attacks on October 7th were barbaric, were, how can I put it? They were horrific. They were indiscriminate. They killed women, children, elderly. Did not matter. They hit civilian institutions and they hit military targets. And on top of that, It seems it's okay now to grab hostages and take them away and speak about it as if it's an act of war. That is something that we condemn. And we condemned it on October the 9th, I believe, or 8th.
In January 2012, 24 soldiers from the notorious SEAL Team 6 floated into the Somali night on their parachutes. Their target was a pirate hideout where 2 hostages were being held. Since neither numerous talks nor the offering of $1.5 million persuaded the hijackers to release them, President Obama had personally authorized a rescue operation. Just a short time later, 24 SEALs then jumped out of a plane over Mogadishu and approached the hideout by parachute so that the hostage takers would not be alerted by loud noises. After landing in a remote area, they crept up to the enemy camp on foot for several kilometers. One hostage remembers hearing a strange noise, which her captors also noticed shortly thereafter. They shouted warnings to each other, but by then it was too late. Out of nowhere, the elite soldiers poured out of the darkness and turned the camp into hell on earth for the enemies. After a short but fierce firefight, they had killed all 9 pirates and freed the hostages, whereupon they were picked up by several helicopters.
They pushed between 80 and 100 people into those wagons. And we had arrived at Auschwitz. We did not realize the location that we were. That was going to happen to us. We were ordered to leave all the luggage at the railroad station. The only luggage that my father was able to take with him was his talus bag, which contained the talus and tefillin. When one of the officers saw that he has that bag under his arm, he grabbed it from my father and threw it down onto the floor. My father asked him, "Please, I only want that one item." The Gestapo said, "Man, where you are going, you are not going to need it." We didn't know what it meant. I know now.
That was drain pipe that flag was put on. People don't know that. We had no polo for a flag. We didn't know anything about a flag going up on the mountain. So they found this drain pipe and they put it together. And the Japanese used it to get rainwater down in the cave. They couldn't remake their water. They couldn't purify it like we did. We purified our water. It didn't taste too good, but it was pure. And when we get up to the crest and stand there, look here to that wall. There it goes up. Man, it was a shock. And everybody saw that flag go up out in the bay. All those ships out there let go in the air with tracers and rockets. And our boys that were on the north fighting with the airstrip while we're doing Suribachi, they started opening up with tracers. It was just like a spectacle. It infuriated the Japanese. They fought twice as hard. We put our flag on Japanese soil for the first time in history.
How far were you from that flag?
Well, from here to that picture on the wall.
So I got assigned this white officer. He was 6'4", tall, blonde hair, blue-eyed, that stereotypical picture of what you would think a racist cop with a big handlebar mustache. So we ended up getting in the car with him, and we're driving to Oakwood where he worked, and I couldn't believe I was hearing it. "What's up, Snow? How you doing, Snow? God bless you, man. Thank you, man. Thanks for what you did for me, man. I appreciate you. Thanks for saving my cousin." And I'm sitting there like, you know, in shock, right? This white guy is getting more love than I've ever seen a black person get, right? So one day I asked him, I said, "Sir, why do these people love you so much?" And I'm thinking in my head, in my woke mind, are you so corrupt and so dangerous that these people are afraid of you that they say hello to you? Right? So he pulls the car over and says, "Dion, this is Oakwood. It's the most dangerous part of the area we serve. The people who live here understand there's a high level of crime and they know why we're here. Here's the thing they want from you and me. Whether we're arresting them, saving them, counseling them, they just want us to treat them like human beings with dignity and respect. And as long as you work with me, young man, you will treat everyone we contact with dignity and respect."
And that was the military shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Maher.
If you are living in sin this very moment, my son, my daughter, if you are thinking for a moment it is too late for you to come back and fix your life, if you think you've gone too deep, too far, where there is no comeback, if you think God has forgotten you, God has forsaken you, if you think the Lord Jesus doesn't care or give one penny about you, if you see that it is too late for you to fix you, just say, Lord, forgive me. I've been standing idle for too long. I've been serving Satan for too long. I've been living in this world for too long. Today, I say, Lord, I've had enough.
And that was Bishop Maher. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the remainder of the chapter of the 33 strategies of war.
Never take it for granted that your past successes will continue into the future. Actually, your past successes are your biggest obstacle. Every battle, every war is different, and you cannot assume that what worked before will work today. You must cut yourself loose from the past and open your eyes to the present. Your tendency to fight the last war may lead to your final war. From On War by Karl von Clausewitz. When in 1806 the Prussian generals plunged into the open jaws of disaster by using Frederick the Great's oblique order of battle, it was not just a case of a style that had outlived its usefulness, but the most extreme poverty of the imagination to which routine has ever led. The result was that the Prussian army under Hohenlohe was ruined more completely than any army has ever been ruined on the battlefield. The present war. In 1605, Miyamoto Musashi, a samurai who had made a name for himself as a swordsman at the young age of 21, was challenged to a duel. The challenger, a young man named Matashichiro, came from the Yoshioka family, a clan itself renowned for swordsmanship. Earlier that year, Musashi had defeated Matashichiro's father, Genzaemon, in a duel. Days later, he had killed Genzaemon's younger brother in another duel. The Yoshioka family wanted revenge. Musashi's friends smelled a trap in Matashichiro's challenge and offered to accompany him to the duel. But Musashi went alone. In his earlier fights with the Yoshiokas, he had angered them by showing up hours late. This time, though, he came early and hid in the trees. Matashichiro arrived with a small army. Musashi would arrive way behind schedule as usual, one of them said, but that trick won't work with us anymore. Confident in their ambush, Matashichiro's men lay down and hid in the grass. Suddenly, Musashi leaped out from behind his tree and shouted, "I've been waiting long enough. Draw your sword." In one swift stroke, he killed Matashichiro, then took a position at an angle to the other men. All of them jumped to their feet, but they were caught off guard and startled, and instead of surrounding him, they stood in a broken line. Musashi simply ran down the line, killing the dazed men one after another in a matter of seconds. Musashi's victory sealed his reputation as one of Japan's greatest swordsmen. He now roamed the country looking for suitable challenges. In one town, he heard of an undefeated warrior named Baiken, whose weapons were a sickle and a long chain with a steel ball at the end of it. Musashi wanted to see these weapons in action, but Baiken refused. The only way he could see them work, Baiken said, was by fighting a duel. Once again, Musashi's friends chose the safe route. They urged him to walk away. No one had come close to defeating Baiken, whose weapons were unbeatable. Swinging his ball in the air to build up momentum, he would force his victim backward with a relentless charge, then hurl the ball at the man's face. His opponent would have to fend off the ball and chain, and while his sword arm was occupied, in that brief instant, Baiken would slash him with the sickle across his neck. Ignoring the warnings of his friends, Musashi challenged Baiken and showed up at the man's tent with two swords, one long, one short. Baiken had never seen someone fight with two swords. Also, instead of letting Baiken charge him, Musashi charged first, pushing his foe back on his heels. Baiken hesitated to throw the ball, for Musashi could parry it with one sword and strike him with the other. As he looked for an opening, Musashi suddenly knocked him off balance with a blow of the short sword, and then in a split second followed with a thrust of the long one, stabbing him through and killing the once undefeated master Baiken. A few years later, Musashi heard about a great samurai named Sasaki Ganryu, who fought with a very long sword, a startlingly beautiful weapon which seemed possessed of some warlike spirit. This fight would be Musashi's ultimate test. Ganryu accepted his challenge. The duel would take place on a little island near the samurai's home. On the morning of the duel, the island was packed. A fight between such warriors was unprecedented. Ganryu arrived on time, but Musashi was late. Very late. An hour went by. Then 2. Ganryu was furious. Finally, a boat was spotted approaching the island. Its passenger was lying down, half asleep it seemed, whittling at a long wooden oar. It was Musashi. He seemed lost in thought, staring into the clouds. When the boat came to shore, he tied a dirty towel around his head and jumped out of the boat, brandishing the long oar, longer than Ganryu's famous sword. This strange man had come to the biggest fight of his life with an oar for a sword and a towel for a headband. Ganryu called out angrily, "Are you so frightened of me that you have broken your promise to be here by 8? Musashi said nothing, but stepped closer. Ganryu drew his magnificent sword and threw the sheath onto the sand. Musashi smiled. "Sasaki, you have just sealed your doom." "Me? Defeated? Impossible." "What victor on earth," replied Musashi, "would abandon his sheath to the sea?" This enigmatic remark only made Ganryu angrier. Then Musashi charged, aiming his sharpened oar straight for his enemy's eyes. Ganryu quickly raised his sword and struck at Musashi's head, but missed, only cutting the towel headband in 2. He had never missed before. In almost the same instant, Musashi brought down his wooden sword, knocking Ganryu off his feet. The spectators gasped. As Ganryu struggled up, Musashi killed him with a blow to the head. Then, after bowing politely to the men officiating over the duel, he got back into the boat and left as calmly as he had arrived. From that moment on, Musashi was considered a swordsman without peer. Interpretation. Miyamoto Musashi, author of The Book of 5 Rings, won all his duels for one reason. In each instance, he adapted his strategy to his opponent and to the circumstances of the moment. With Matashichiro, he decided it was time to arrive early, which he hadn't done in his previous fights. Victory against superior numbers depended on surprise, so he leaped up when his opponents lay down. Then, once he had killed their leader, he set himself at an angle that invited them to charge at him instead of surrounding him, which would have been much more dangerous for him. With Baiken, it was simply a matter of using 2 swords and then crowding his space, giving him no time to react intelligently to this novelty. With Ganryu, he set out to infuriate and humiliate his haughty opponent. The wooden sword, the nonchalant attitude, the dirty towel headband, the enigmatic remark, the charge at the eyes. Musashi's opponents depended on brilliant technique, flashy swords, and unorthodox weapons. That is the same as fighting the last war. Instead of responding to the moment, they relied on training, technology, and what had worked before. Musashi, who had grasped the essence of strategy when he was still very young, turned their rigidity into their downfall. His first thought was of the gambit that would take this particular opponent most by surprise. Then he would anchor himself in the moment. Having set his opponent off balance with something unexpected, he would watch carefully, then respond with another action, usually improvised, that would turn mere disequilibrium
into defeat and death. In preparing yourself for war, you must rid yourself of myths and misconceptions. Strategy is not a question of learning a series of moves or ideas to follow like a recipe. Victory has no magic formula. Ideas are merely nutrients for the soil. They lie in your brain as possibilities, so that in the heat of the moment, they can inspire a direction, an appropriate and creative response. Let go of all fetishes, books, techniques, formulas, flashy weapons, and learn to become your own strategist.
And that was actually the second part of Chapter 2, Do Not Fight the Last War, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Soviet nuclear submarines defects to the United States in 1984.
In November 1984, on a cold, hard morning on the northwestern coast of the Soviet Union, a brand new variant of the Soviet Typhoon-class nuclear ballistic missile submarine sails out of her base in Murmansk and heads out into the Polyarny Inlet towards the Barents Sea. A large vessel, she is 12 meters longer than the standard Typhoon class and 3 meters wider. A US satellite catches an image of her as she makes for open sea. A brand new unknown vessel setting sail at the height of the Cold War triggers a flurry of activity among CIA analysts, trying to figure out the capabilities and mission of this mysterious new submarine. She submerges into the dark, icy water. NATO submarines routinely patrol near the Soviet base at Murmansk in order to observe and shadow Soviet submarines as they make their way into the North Atlantic. This day is no different, and the sonar operator aboard the US Los Angeles-class attack submarine USS Dallas picks up the sound of the distant submerged submarine on sonar as it heads out. The Dallas begins to track, but all of a sudden the contact disappears from sonar, as silent as the night, as if the sub had completely cut its engine. With the Soviet vessel now producing no sound whatsoever, it is invisible. The sonar operator aboard the Dallas would later recall thinking he could hear the sound of singing coming from the vessel, potentially the music of Paganini, Pavarotti, or maybe something else. Whatever the sound, the Soviet submarine is now sailing so silently that it will be nearly impossible to pick up by NATO submarines and sonar nets. Her intentions so far are unclear. The silent Soviet submarine continues her voyage towards the North Atlantic. This development is highly disturbing, with CIA and Navy analysts concluding that this new submarine must be using some kind of silent or nearly silent propulsion system. If it came to armed conflict between NATO and the Soviet Union, this could allow the ballistic missile submarine to park a couple of hundred nuclear warheads off Washington or New York, and no one would know anything about it until it was all over. Alarmingly, US satellites now also detect that some 58 Soviet nuclear submarines have also sortied from their bases at Polyarny, the Baltic, and Mediterranean, and retasked from existing missions in the Atlantic, with further port activity detected suggesting that 22 cruisers and destroyers are also preparing to leave Polyarny immediately. This constitutes the bulk of the Soviet surface fleet in the North Atlantic. A national security briefing is convened at the White House. The NSA presents the devastating intelligence that the captain of the Typhoon-class submarine had sent a letter to Red Fleet Command just before leaving. The contents of the letter are unknown, but it immediately triggered Red Fleet Command to order the sortie of the entire fleet to find the submarine in question and sink her. On the face of it, it would appear that the captain has gone rogue and threatens independent missile launch on the United States. Not knowing whether this is true, or whether this is in fact the beginning of a move against NATO, the President orders the US Navy's Atlantic Fleet to move into the North Atlantic to meet the incoming Soviet combat vessels. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Dallas, the sonar operator has detected the sound of what his computer is telling him is seismic activity. Upon further investigation of the sound, he believes that it must be man-made, and informs his captain that he believes this is the Soviet submarine, and that he can track it. With the sub entering underwater trench-like rock formations, a dangerous route through the rocks that she cannot follow, the USS Dallas will position herself on the other side and wait for the submarine to emerge. However, with the Soviet sub maneuvering tightly through the underwater rock formations, Dallas suddenly picks up her engine sounds again. For some reason, the submarine has disengaged her silent propulsion and re-engaged her noise-emitting conventional propulsion. With multiple Russian surface and submarine groups and close to 100 Soviet Tu-95 Bear Foxtrot anti-submarine bombers searching for her, it doesn't take long for Bear Foxtrot's number 692 to find the Soviet sub. The bomber drops sonar buoys onto the surface so that the crew can hear and locate their position. The sub-captain orders battle stations, but with their navigation through the underwater canyons relying on maintaining course and speed, he cannot dive for safety. On the next pass, the Bear drops a torpedo against them. The weapon locks onto the submarine, closing quickly. With a turn in the canyon approaching, the captain prepares to launch countermeasures and leaves the turn to the last moment. As late as he dares, he orders a hard turn to starboard around the corner. This daring maneuver is enough to confuse the torpedo, which overshoots and explodes into the canyon wall. A close call, but with the Russian bomber now heading off, they resume through the rock formations. Meanwhile, the Dallas is waiting at the end of the formation for the Soviet submarine to emerge. Detecting the so-called seismic anomaly once more, it appears that the sub has re-engaged its silent drive, and the Typhoon-class submarine appears. Dallas slips in close behind her so as to follow without being detected. All of a sudden, the Russian sub veers hard to port in a maneuver to check for enemy submarines behind her. Dallas cuts her engines and makes like a hole in the water, hoping the Russian submariners will not detect her. This maneuver is named the Crazy Ivan by the Americans, as when following close behind, there is a high risk of collision between the two vessels. The Americans listen carefully as the Soviet submarine performs a full circle around them, eventually resuming its original course. The ruse has worked, and Dallas remains undetected. However, Dallas immediately receives a radio signal saying that a member of the CIA is en route by helicopter to be delivered to the vessel, and that she must break off her pursuit to surface and receive him. Fearing that this will alert the Soviet sub to their presence, the captain gives the Russian a wide berth and falls behind to pick up the mysterious visitor. While this is taking place, back in Washington, D.C., the Soviet ambassador to the United States requests a meeting with the president. He explains that the captain of the rogue submarine has gone insane and intends to fire his nuclear weapons on the United States. Meanwhile, the USS Dallas is back in the baffles of the Soviet submarine. A CIA analyst, now aboard, has another theory. They may in fact be trying to defect. With fresh orders now received to sink the submarine, an argument breaks out in the control room of the Dallas. At this moment, the Soviet sub performs another Crazy Ivan, this time to starboard. This time, Dallas does not go silent, allowing her to be detected. The Soviet captain, alerted to the American sub nearby, surfaces, as does the Dallas. In the control room of the Soviet sub, the crew see their captain peer into the periscope at the other submarine. As is normal procedure in a combat engagement, the captain orders a single acoustic ping to verify the range of the American submarine. This is carried out without hesitation. After a few more moments, the captain mysteriously orders another ping, but then orders the submarine break off from the American sub and head south to a deep area of ocean in the Grand Banks called the Laurentian Abyssal. 20 hours later, alarms suddenly ring out on the Soviet vessel, alerting of a meltdown in the nuclear reactor. One by one, compartmental radiation alarms trigger. A highly dangerous situation, the captain orders the submarine to surface immediately, and for the crew to be disembarked onto the life rafts. However, after surfacing, and when scanning the horizon for activity, the Oliver Hazard Perry-class guided missile frigate, the USS Reuben James, is spotted bearing down on them, signaling with lights, "Do not attempt to submerge, or you will be fired upon." The Americans launch a Seahawk helicopter to monitor, and put a shot across the vessel's bow. The Soviet captain tells his men who are boarding the life rafts that the officers will re-enter the vessel, submerge, and scuttle the submarine to prevent it from falling into American hands. Amid reports of heroic music emanating from the deck, the Soviet sub submerges. The Russian sailors see the Seahawk move in and drop a torpedo into the water, willing their heroic captain good luck in his fight with the American capitalists. Meanwhile, beneath the waves, an American DSRV, a small rescue submarine, slowly moves in and docks with the Soviet sub. With the American torpedo having been safely detonated several hundred yards away, it is now safe for the 3 Americans inside to board the Soviet vessel. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a Russian torpedo screams in and smashes into the hull of the sub, but disintegrates without exploding. Completely undetected by anyone, a Soviet Alpha-class attack submarine, the Konovalov, has arrived and fired on her. It is rumored that the captain of the Konovalov has a special place in his heart for the captain of the Typhoon-class submarine, but has been ordered to kill his old friend. Realizing his torpedoes had the wrong settings, he corrects the problem and fires again. The massive Typhoon class does not have the maneuverability to take on an Alpha-class attack sub. She slowly lumbers around and accelerates directly into the torpedo's path, at a heading of 315. Amid conversations around the performance of Admiral Halsey at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the distance is closed so quickly that again the safety features of the torpedo do not allow it to explode, and it smashes into the hull without detonation once more. With his target now behind him, Captain Tupolev aboard the Konovalov orders full right rudder to shake the big vessel loose. Meanwhile, he removes all of the safety mechanisms from his torpedoes. He won't make the same mistake again. Ignoring the sound of gunfire detected by sonar, using his superior maneuverability, his Alpha-class sub draws around in a full circle, slowly bringing his bow around onto the stern of his prey. It's now only a matter of time. Gaining a good track on the Typhoon-class sub, the Konovalov fires another torpedo. Out of nowhere, the USS Dallas arrives and pulls in behind the Soviet submarine. With the torpedo now tracking the American submarine instead, the captain of the Dallas orders countermeasures deployed and a full emergency blow. The Dallas, nicknamed Big D, flies towards the surface, drawing the torpedo off target. The Russian crew evacuated earlier watch with delight as the USS Dallas is seen breaching out of the water in cowardice. Their brave captain will surely receive the Order of Lenin for scaring the American dogs out of the water. Back beneath the waves, the Russian torpedo is still active, and after searching for a new target, finds the Typhoon-class sub once more. This time, however, the mighty vessel turns directly towards the Konovalov. The 2 Soviet vessels bear down on each other as the torpedo closes in. Appearing to play chicken with each other, this one certainly looks like it's going to be close. At the last moment, the Typhoon dives underneath the Alpha. The maneuver works, and the torpedo instead homes directly into the bow of the Konovalov. With no time for her to react, the torpedo detonates. The detonation causes massive secondary explosions across the ship, as the Konovalov tears herself apart. Back on the surface, the Russian sailors watch in horror as their captain and hero of the Soviet Union meets his end. It is unknown what happened to the Typhoon-class submarine after the engagement. The Soviet Navy presumes her sunk after a radiation problem. Completely unrelated, the Soviet ambassador asks for American help to find a missing Alpha-class submarine in the area of the Grand Banks. A couple of years later, the US Navy would very rapidly develop a nearly silent propulsion system for their submarines. The incident would be quickly covered up by both sides, and according to repeated statements by both the Soviet and American governments, nothing of what you have seen here ever happened.
And that was the Soviet nuclear submarine defects to the United States in 1984. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now it is the first half of Chapter 4 Policing the Community from Policecraft.
4. Policing the community. Maybe this is what it feels like for civilians when they see cops doing some of the dirty work. A lot of times they don't understand what's happening. They see something they don't like and it upsets them because they don't have the full story, aren't personally facing the problem, and don't know how much worse the alternative could be. Jim Butcher, proven guilty. Now and again, a member of the community will call the police on the police. You'll respond to a dispatched assignment, and the citizen won't like the way the conversation is going, so he'll get on his cell and ask for different cops. Dispatch will ask you if everything is all right, because another 911 call for your location has just been received by the telecommunicator. You tell dispatch all is well, and you let the caller know that you sense his anger and frustration, and you will renew your pledge to help him in the best way you can, but he had best get off the line unless he wants to be cited for 911 abuse. Some callers won't be satisfied with the police services you are providing and will request an officer of a specific race. I want a black cop, they might insist. Now, if a female assault victim wants a female officer, you accommodate her because it can help make her more comfortable and forthcoming. If it's a translation issue, you find an officer who speaks the language. But other than that, you don't do such special requests, because it's a police department, not a restaurant. You can't tailor your order. You may not demand an athletic, bi-curious Tongan officer with just a tinge of rakish insouciance. As the old saying goes, which I sometimes use with my 5-year-old, you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit. If the aggrieved caller wishes to file a complaint against you, they'll demand your name and badge number, which you are required to provide. If the person requesting your information is drunk or high, some officers have been known to take a few liberties with this policy. You'd like my name, my good man? You bet. It's Officer Nasium. Officer Jim Nasium. One type of fellow who frequently asks for your name and badge number is a member of the community who holds a special place in the hearts of law enforcement. He is a white male, typically heterosexual, between 16 and 30 years old. He is well off, or at least his family is. He favors pressed khakis and designer golf shirts worn with the collar popped. His hair is artfully tousled. He is not battle-tested, unless you count Twitter wars. A bad day for him is when his tennis racket comes unstrung. He probably drives a Fiat, and he tends to get huffy if you pull him over, because stop signs aren't for him, they're for other people. He tends to lack perspective, but ooze entitlement. This storied individual is known in police parlance as a Chad, because that's usually his name, or something like it. It could be Lance, Trent, Damien, Blake. Still confused about this terminology? I'll use it in a sentence. Cop 1. What's your victim like on the 9th Street robbery? Cop 2. He ain't much. Some Chad from Marin County. Not every rich kid is a Chad, and moreover, there's nothing wrong with Chads per se. Their heavy reliance on styling gel and valet parking stimulates the economy. But when they leave their high-end laptop on the coffee shop table and go to the bathroom and are shocked when it's stolen, you have to let them know that, sorry, we can't call in the gunships and ground-penetrating radar. If you have tracking on that thing, we'll do our best to run it down. We'll check for video surveillance and put your serial number in the system, but other than that, you're going to have to chalk it up to a loss. If they don't like the way things are going, Chads are known to invoke the lame standby. Do you know who my parents are? The automatic cop response is, excuse me, can anyone locate this young man's parents? He doesn't know who they are. Which is kind of lame in its own right. But you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Even worse is the, do you know who I am question, which is still alive and kicking among the upper crust. Everyone from Reese Witherspoon to Alec Baldwin has trotted it out when stopped by the police. I'm not aware of it ever working. Damn it, man, you can't arrest him. He played Agent Nick Kudrow in Mercury Rising. However, there is one circumstance under which "do you know who I am" can potentially reap dividends. I'm talking about diplomats. It doesn't quite go like in the movies where they can murder away with impunity. But if a diplomat commits an act he claims is performed in the exercise of his consular function, you can't arrest him except in the case of a serious felony that endangers public safety. And if you pull over some ambassador and have reason to believe that she is blitzed out of her mind after a consular visit to the local brew pub, San Francisco Police Department General Order 5.13 essentially states that in lieu of a drunk driving arrest, you are to escort her back to where she's staying and write a report that will later be reviewed by the FBI and the State Department. The bottom line is if you stop anyone who flashes fancy international credentials, you need permission to take police action and will end up setting off a string of phone calls that will run from your Special Investigations Division up to at least a deputy chief, which might mean calling them in the middle of the night, which I am told they do not care for. In addition to celebrities and diplomats, another class of people vying for special protection these days seems to be United States college students. Quite a few viral videos of late show some college kid being arrested by law enforcement. There's a violent struggle during which a young man is taken down and handcuffed and comes up bloodied. At some point, tomorrow's leader proclaims, "But I go to state." Yep, the public seems to think, there the police go, assuming everyone is a hoodlum and brutalizing all in their path. Look at that educated young man with the scraped-up face. De facto proof of police terrorism. But what the police see is someone they have just caused to detain or arrest trying to pull away from them. Someone showing the beginnings of fight or flight. This is against the law. It's called resisting/obstructing an officer. If you don't think the police are justified in stopping you, have your friends videotape the whole thing and file a complaint afterward. But if you resist the police, you are probably going to the ground. Hard. This is what police training dictates. A member of the public isn't just allowed to ignore your lawful directives without consequence. Otherwise, you'd just have a bunch of police out there shrugging and saying things like, "I tried to arrest him, but he pulled away, and I was like, 'Rats, there goes another one.' When the kid cries out, 'But I go to state,' you search your brain for any blanket immunity from prosecution one receives upon enrolling in college, even a well-thought-of institution, and you don't come up with anything. You aren't high-fiving your partner because his face got scraped up. You are not in the pain game if you can help it. Moreover, suspect injuries, however slight, are just more paperwork for you and likely a hospital run. Here's some good news for all young undergraduates. There is a simple yet elegant solution to avoiding this fate, and it is this. Refrain from resisting arrest, especially while standing on hard pavement. Pavement hurts, and it is unreasonable to expect the officer to say to his partner, "Hal, we got a violent young adult on our hands. Let's try to maneuver him over to that soft, dewy field I saw 3 blocks from here." Regardless, when the fight is over, you clean the university student up and guide him through the arrest process. Maybe he gets a few stitches. Perhaps he spends a weekend in jail. He is left with a painful lesson about submitting to just authority. See? You do learn stuff in college after all. Professor Stephen L. Carter, in his magnificent book, Civility, holds that we can be civil without being familiar and cautions against the danger of saying the first thing that comes into your head. Words are magic, he writes. We conjure with them. We send messages. We paint images. Saying please and thank you to the public is simple, but goes a long way. It can also be all too rare. Some officers mistake civility for weakness, and we aren't always careful with our words. When the community says, "Fuck you," it's tempting to respond in kind. But as the old aphorism goes, never wrestle with a pig, because you both get dirty, but the pig likes it. So you gotta take the high road. Because when you police neighborhoods where the citizens' reaction to you ranges from mistrust to hate, the wrong word at the wrong time can be the spark in a mine full of coal dust. When you talk down to or outright goad a member of the public, be it a career felon or just some regular Joe you happen to find annoying, the damage is twofold. First, you have sunk to a level not befitting someone who is supposed to be a trained de-escalator and problem solver. Second, you have made the road tougher for both yourself and the next cop who works with that person.
And that was the first part of Chapter 4, Policing the Community, from Policecraft by Adam Plantinga, who is a sergeant in the San Francisco Police Department. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.